So coming back to this, measurement in the old frameworks, not much going on. Measurement in the new framework, it's given you guidance, hasn't been out much, so you don't really see it in the standards that are available at this point in time. But the framework project has been ongoing for many years. And you can almost, if you follow the history of that project and where we ended now, the movement between the 89 framework, which was conservative, through to the new framework that's sort of a bit more 21st century thinking. If you draw a graph of the standards by the dates they came out, you can almost see how that change is reflected in the standards. So, for example, let's take asset standards that you're familiar with. The inventory standard, if you have a look over there, the measurement basis, and it's split in this diagram into, in the center, we have the assets going out to inventory to the left of it. Then at initial recognition, when we do IS2, and you might have done it in your introductory course, initial recognition of inventories at cost, historical cost. And then later on, we either take the lower of that or the net realizable value. So that's really conservative. In other words, we can write that cost down, but heaven forbid we go above it. So it's worst case scenario. And that's typical of that generation, if you like, of financial reporters that were involved in setting standards at the time. They'd rather have it 100% accurate and worst case scenario than going for faithful representation as we understand it today. If you move on that circle now and you move clockwise from inventory to property, plant, and equipment, again, it's at historical cost, so it is an older standard, but then it brings in that RM, the revaluation model. But it gives you the choice because we don't want to upset anybody. We're old-fashioned. We don't want to upset and cause any issues. So let's give you a choice revaluation model. You don't have to use it if you're going to get upset by moving towards fair value. But you can see the movement happening there. We're starting to move away from this concept of historical costs. And then if you go around the circle to about 2 or 3 o'clock, you see investment property, another standard we'll do with you this year. And interesting, look at that one. At the point of initial recognition cost, fair enough, faithfully represented, that's what I paid for it. But later on now, it's the cost model or not revaluation model, it's fair value model. So now it's really going into fair value accounting space cadet kind of area. And if you move then down to 4 o'clock on the screen as you're looking at it, the financial instruments, now watch that initial cost has changed. It's not initially recognized at cost anymore. It's initially recognized at fair value. Isn't that interesting? So there you can almost see a timeline of financial reporting over the last 20, 25 years. Then on the liability side, you'll be able to see similar things. I've just put this in for interest sake now for you. We will go through each of these topics in time. But between the last slide and this slide, you can get an idea of how challenging financial reporting has become because every sort of asset is measured on a different basis. Every liability is measured differently. And that is what happened because we didn't have measurement guidance in the framework. There was no generally accepted document that we could sit around the table at the ISB and think, this is what we're going to do. This will be consistent. It will give us faithful representation. It will give us relevant information. So there's the consequence of not having a framework. It results in a massive amount of diversity. And you sitting there as a student now thinking, oh my word, how am I going to remember all this stuff? Well, for your purpose, it becomes interesting when you know the history. I'm not the biggest history buff, but just understanding where we come from, doesn't that sort of help you in understanding where the position we are now? And that's broader than financial reporting. I mean, here's a free life lesson for you. Call me Dr. Phil. But understand where we come from, that we don't make the same mistakes again, is very important. And that's similar in financial reporting. And we now have a measurement section. And going forward, when we're setting accounting policies that there's no standard for, or you're writing commentary letters to the ISB, we're all going to be singing from the same hymn sheet, if you like. And that's going to be what measurement base is going to give me the most relevant information and faithfully represents whatever economic event I am reporting on.